Okay, so today we're going to be looking at a couple buildings in Byzantine era. These are both in early Byzantine. So if you look back at your class 21, this is early Byzantine still. And like we mentioned before, Byzantine architecture is going to be fairly similar throughout what we're studying. It's going to have a lot of influence because in the early days of Christianity in the West, there was not a lot of specific architecture for Christianity, for churches, that was really Christian in nature. It was basically Roman. So they're taking Roman basilicas and turning them into churches, and then they're starting to build new basilicas based on the old Roman basilica. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. But Byzantine architecture really starts to develop as a thing of its own, on its own style. So we'll start to look at a couple of those. The biggest one and the most important of these Byzantine churches is called the Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia. It's not Hagia, no. It's the Hagia Sophia. This was built between 531 and 537, and it was done in 6 short years. Just 6 years. It was completed. It's a huge church. Yeah, it's a lot of people just working on it. Yeah.
Sorry, where is this located?
This is in Constantinople.
Oh.
Where's that now?
Istanbul. So right on the Bosphorus in Turkey. So right between, basically it is the dividing line between Europe and Asia. And remember, this is where Constantine put the Roman Empire. So this was the center of the Roman Empire for a time. This was the center of Christianity. Even though the Pope was in Rome, this is where everything is happening during this time period, during the 500s. Because again, Rome is starting to fall. Rome is not as important. The balance of power is being shifted over to Constantinople. So we're going to talk about the building. We're going to talk about the construction. Keep in mind, these towers, they're called minarets. These were added later when it turned into a mosque. Okay, so
Those towers must be to a mosque.
so these are the towers where there's a call to prayer. So every mosque has some sort of a tower, either off to the side or in it or on it, and that's where the call to prayer is led from. I'm sorry? They would go up there. Nowadays, it's loudspeakers. And so in this case, there are 4. Not every mosque has 4. This is just, they took over this church and turned it into a grand mosque. It's complicated. We'll talk about it. It's complicated. So this is what it looks like today.
What's the court? Wait, is that a courtyard or something?
Mm-hmm. Courtyard.
Wait, there's a mosque next to a mosque?
Mm-hmm.
That's another mosque behind
It's another mosque. Yep. All right, so how is it constructed? Pretty impressively. So we have this longitudinal basilica here, right? So it's not square. It's more rectangular. But it's completely unique. It was done in this completely unique way. So it's taking some aspects of Roman architecture, it's taking some aspects of Eastern architecture, and it's kind of mixing them and turning it into its own new thing. One of the things that was impressive was this idea of putting a dome on top of a structure. That hadn't been done before. So a dome might have been put on top of a smaller structure, but not on top of a huge building by itself. So when we see the Pantheon, right? The Pantheon was basically a sphere. And there were some domes, on smaller structures, but this was the biggest dome, this was the biggest dome that was placed like on top of a building that we had seen so far. And so we're going to see that kind of example carry over into other Christian churches, even in the West as we move forward. Yeah.
and the other picture they put 2 mosques next to each other?
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure what that other building is, honestly. I'm sorry? It's a Islamic church, Islamic place of worship. Okay. So we have this structure. This is the blueprint. This is the plan. So we have these structures. We have these columns, and we have these large pillars that are going to be supporting the main dome. So you can see how it's supporting the dome, right? And then there's going to be these other domes that are going to be kind of added onto it. It almost kind of looks like making a bubble sculpture, right? So they're doing one dome here and then adding on other domes. And again, first time that they're able to kind of understand the structural engineering to a point where, hey, we can put one dome, one half dome next to each other, and it's still structurally sound as long as there's the supports. And it works. It's still standing today. The structure that's still standing today is essentially still the 6th century edifice, although an earthquake caused a partial collapse. And there were other collapses in the mid-500s, but those were quickly restored. So basically what we're seeing today is essentially original. All right, so how is the dome constructed? How is it made? Well, the dome is the dome. It's made out of this unreinforced concrete, just like the Pantheon. It's not as big, it's not as tall, it's not as wide as the Pantheon was. But again, how do you make it work on the top of a structure? So they came up with this concept, and these are called pendentives. It's in bold, so you're going to want to know it. Okay? All right, so here's the columns that are supporting the structure, right? The columns that go all the way down. And they figured, well, we can turn a square into a circle. We can turn this structure of these 4 columns, which is a square, and we can set a dome on top. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill in this area here in between. So we're going to make these arches between each dome, make an arch in between each dome, and then this triangular area here is going to create a ring on which we can place a dome. This area here, this is looking at it from the top, this area here, this is called the pendentive.
Why do you use so many domes?
So just the triangle part.
Just the triangle part. That's called the pendentive. And that's what makes a dome work. That's how you can make a dome on top of pillars. What's that?
Why do they use so many domes?
They wanted to make it as grand and as tall as possible. They hadn't quite figured out.
Like, how come all the domes have domes? Like, was that like...
That's the style. That's the Byzantine style. That's the Eastern style. So when Islam comes around, and Islam didn't start until the 500s, right around the time this was being built, and Islam didn't really gain in any kind of power or popularity until about the 800s or 900s. And so mosques, again, just like how Christians took over, quote unquote, or used Roman basilicas for their church design in the West, mosques are going to take this Byzantine style and use it for their design. And that's going to kind of become the Islamic style. So everyone's borrowing from everyone. Yeah.
So are those arches and stuff, are they like curving like this upwards? So like not the arches themselves, but like the I guess the stakes, like where the stakes?
No, these are perfectly vertical.
Oh,
And they're, so on this axis, so the arch is perfectly on this axis, and then this arch is perfectly on this axis, and then the pendentive is the part that's curved in the middle. And then that creates the ring where you can plop the dome on top. Okay, so this was a new innovation. Architects in the West and in the East are going to use this, but this was the first time it was used in any grand scale. They had kind of started to play with this idea, a couple hundred years prior, but nothing on this scale. Yeah. So this was made by originally Constantine wanted a church built on this site. There was a smaller church built on this site, and then later on the Roman ruler, the ruler of the area, said, let's. He is. This is a Christian church. It was taken over by the Muslims later. But it was a Christian church at first. It was restored again in the mid-14th century. For more than a millennium, this was the seat, this was the headquarters of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. Long story about the East and how that works, but we've talked about how there's patriarchs, right, in different churches. We've talked about how there's the head of the Church of Constantinople. Just like the head of the Church of Rome is the Pope, there are different patriarchs. They're head of the various churches, right? So there's the Church of Constantinople, just like the Roman Church, and this is where the Patriarch of Constantinople, this was his main church. This was his cathedral. if we go inside and we look inside, we see quite a bit of this very ornate sculpture, ironwork, and these pillars. So these pillars are original, and this is very much Eastern. So they're taking the Roman idea, they're taking the Greek and the Roman concepts, but they're making it more interesting, more flamboyant, right? That's that Eastern style coming in. So again, it's this marrying of West and East. This ironwork was added later when it was turned into a mosque, but it fits, right? You can see how, is that really loud today or is it just me? Anyway, you can see how even though this is Islamic, this is Christian, there's this continuity there. And it doesn't really have anything to do with religion. It has to do with the area. It has to do with this is the place where it is.
Why would
Mhm. Yeah.
In the old times, before they had like battery-powered lighting,
Yeah.
they actually light
A lot of candles. Yeah. And there were not a lot of services. There was not a lot of liturgy that was done while it was dark. It was done in the morning, or during the day. There were earlier on in the church, there was strict prohibitions against having mass before sunlight, before daylight. It was pretty rare to do anything at night. If you would go in, so obviously there would be monks and people going in for compline, later things, but they would just light some candles around where they're going to be. They're not going to light up the whole basilica. It would be dark. Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of a random question, but how long does the midnight mass in Melissa last? Like they have the ceremony and then they have mass, right?
Yeah. For Easter?
No, for Christmas. Sorry.
Oh, it's like the same as a solemn high mass. There's nothing really different about it. Hour and a half. Yeah, something like that.
Wait, why does the ironwork on that? Why would they add that when they did?
Because this whole part of the structure, this whole thing right here, this was added on as
What is it?
it's like a pulpit.
Also, the pulpit wasn't there when they built
Not that one.
That thing's huge.
Not that one. So there were a lot of things that were added. There were a lot of things that were taken out. We're going to look through that. But first, let's look at
So when would we get our test back?
I've got them right here. But first, let's look at a couple of the mosaics. So there are a few mosaics that were saved. There are a couple things that, from what we understand, from records that we have, the entire inside was covered with mosaics. But why were they taken out? A lot of them were taken out. Iconoclast. Right? So the iconoclast controversy happened after this was built, and so a lot of the icons were taken out.
It looks like, okay, is that a painting? Kind of looks like a,
It's a mosaic.
okay,
And-
it looks like
Take
a,
it out because iconoclast.
Yep.
how wavy it is.
So
How
the,
big is that?
this
Oh yeah, it looks like there's lights.
this is on an archway, so this is probably about 10 feet wide.
It looks like a
Or-
cloth, like it looks wavy in some places.
Yeah, so it's not perfectly flat. All right, so this one is called the Imperial Gate Mosaic. This is depicting the emperor. We don't know which emperor it is, either Leo the Sixth or his son Constantine the Seventh. So this was done afterwards. So this was done after the iconoclast controversy. So then they added some mosaics back in. So this is a little bit later. So the emperor is bowing down before Christ, who's seated on a jeweled throne, holds an open book that reads, "Peace be with you, I am the light of the world." The medallions on either side of Christ's shoulders, it says soldiers' shoulders. One of them depicts Mary, and the other shows the Archangel Gabriel. Gabriel is very, very important in Eastern theology, in Eastern religion. Okay, so you're going to see Gabriel depicted quite a bit. We see the emperor here. He's depicted, interestingly, as a saint. He has the halo. This wasn't to say that he was a saint on earth. This was more as a way to say he is a representative of God on earth. Again, there was no separation of church and state. Kind of like how Henry VIII was named by the Pope as defender of the faith. Same sort of thing here. The emperor had, and we're going to get into much more of that as we go through some of this history. The emperor, especially in the East, is going to have some say in what happens in the church in his area. And the patriarch or the pope, whatever the case may be, is going to give him some authority, even some authority, and we'll see throughout history, to name some bishops. He's allowed to do that. The pope will still confirm them and say yes, or the patriarch or whoever. He can.
So like, the Pope could tell, I don't know, like the King of England now to just
If he were Catholic, he would, yeah,
Just he can name bishops.
he could. But it's still up to the Pope to say yes or no.
Could he give that power to a random person?
I suppose if he wanted to, but it still the Pope still has to approve it, because remember the authority comes from the Pope through the Pope, right? Yeah.
What was an emperor? Like all throughout history, was it different places, or was it just like one spot that?
There were emperors all throughout. So the emperor would be the head of a large kingdom. So slight difference between what an emperor is and what a king is. An emperor basically is a king over many lands, and this was the case of the emperor of Byzantium. Okay, but again, so the halo, not depicting him as a saint, depicting him as a representative of Christ on earth, but showing him in submission. Right, he had himself. This was commissioned by the emperor, so it's showing himself in submission to Christ. Right, so this is a great thing. It's not showing him, standing right next to Christ. Here's another one. This is one of my favorites. This is called The Virgin and Child. It's in the apse, so this is right over the altar. Again, this was added in later.
Those are the red things. Little space. Like, yeah.
These?
No, the red space like on the seat she's sitting. Like those things, yeah.
Not sure.
Pretty cool.
I'm not sure.
There's seven, sorry.
So this is one of the first ones to be created after the iconoclast controversy. Shows Mary sitting on a backless throne, the child Jesus on her lap, her feet are rested upon a pedestal decked with precious stones. This was set on the original 6th century golden background. So these mosaics in the background here, these all have gold leaf on them. So if you were to go in and you would see it, especially imagine with candlelight, it's just going to be flickering, it's going to be shining, right? Because it's going to be gold, right? All these stones are going to be golden in the background. It's going to be really beautiful.
How do they get so much gold?
It's very, very thin. It's like thinner than tissue paper. Like it almost floats away. So you can pound gold out very, very thin. And then, so you can have like a leaf that's like this big and it's like 20 cents or less. It's not very much. You can do, this whole area is probably done with a piece of gold probably about this big, a block like this big.
Oh my god.
That's how thin you can pound it out. Yeah.
So all those like restaurants that like put their things in gold leaf, it's really not that expensive.
It's not. It's really not. And it doesn't taste like anything, so it's kind of stupid.
Oh wait,
Yeah.
That's actually gold?
Yeah, gold leaf on top of like very fancy desserts. That's gold. You can eat it.
Oh dang.
It doesn't do anything. It just passes right through you. Okay. So this was the original one. It is interesting. Let's talk next about its history as a mosque. So the poor Hagia Sophia goes through a lot of trauma, basically. During the Fourth Crusade in 1204, remember, when was the East-West split? Right around the year 1000, right? So this was an Orthodox schismatic church for a time. Well, it was for many years. During the Crusades, the West goes in and starts to, try to get Jerusalem back, off and on. The Crusades are their own story. But during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, Latin Crusaders, so Western Catholic Crusaders, attacked and desecrated the cathedral before ousting the patriarch and replacing him with a Latin bishop. Right? They see him as no better than, right? He's a schismatic. He's not part of the church, essentially. So they sacked it and they destroyed some of the mosaics as well. Crusaders, often not the best guys. Many beautiful mosaics were pried out and shipped over to Venice. We'll talk about Venice next class. So it goes through some difficulty there. Then in 1453, the Ottomans conquer Constantinople, and then they convert the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. The mosaics were covered with whitewash and plaster. So we have other mosaics here that were just covered up, right? So a lot of the mosaics, this would have all been covered with mosaics probably. This all would have been covered with mosaics.
Oh, so they just go all over it.
They just covered it all up.
I leave that one.
The Muslims have a very interesting relationship with Our Lady. It's one positive thing you can say about their theology. They honor and revere Our Lady.
Oh my gosh.
Because they see Jesus as a prophet, right? They don't see him as Christ. They don't see him as God. They see him as a prophet. And so they have a respect for Mary. They see her as a good person, as a good woman, as a model of what a Muslim woman should be. And so they revere her. So they left this. Because
Muslims were the same people that would like abuse women and stuff like that.
Yes, right. So later on, different factions of Islam are going to start to become more strict about it, and then they're going to start to pervert. Yeah.
So they left Our Lady.
They left Our Lady and they left Jesus there, because Mary and Jesus play a part in their theology. Yeah. So this would be, one kind of saving grace of kind of Islam, right? It is interesting. Our Lady of Fatima. Fatima is not a Portuguese name. Fatima is an Islamic name. Fatima was founded by Muslims when that whole peninsula was conquered. So it's interesting that Our Lady chose that place to come. Maybe it is a way to try to give, Islam some graces, right? Fatima is a common girl's name. And so the head of the Islamic invading army at the time named the town after his daughter Fatima. That's an Islamic name. So it is interesting. Mary does try to get her children back. She always will, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. She wants her children back to come back to her.
Do they believe in that apparition?
No. Mm-mm. I mean, maybe some do. I don't know, but I'm guessing probably not. All right, so it was turned into a mosque. Mehmed II, he added a wooden minaret on the exterior. He added this great chandelier. The altar was obviously taken out. This was added. Yeah.
That's a pulpit?
This is a staircase. This is one pulpit. The other one that we were looking at before with the ironwork is over off to the side. Added in this great chandelier here. And instead of the altar, we have this prayer niche. It is.
Where are the seats?
There are none.
Story?
I'm sorry?
There's a second story?
Huh?
There's a second story?
No, that's the pulpit.
Yeah.
Wait, is there? Oh, up.
3 stories. You can go up there.
You can walk around there?
And this is what's called a prayer niche. And we'll look at that when we look at more Islamic architecture. This is called a mihrab. And every mosque is going to have a mihrab in it, or several mihrabs. Basically, it is a place where you go and you pray, and it is always placed towards the direction of Mecca. So when Muslims pray, they put down a prayer rug, and there's always like a triangle or a point or some sort of a arrow type structure. Yep. And they always, so if a Muslim was praying right here, where's east, like here, he would put his rug right here, and he would pray towards the direction of Mecca, right?
Oh, they do that like on a daily basis, right?
5 times a day.
What's
Yeah, because I saw a guy doing that Pecos.
Yeah.
What about Luke say?
Mecca is the place where I might get this wrong. Mecca is the place where I think Muhammad ascended into heaven.
How long does it take?
It's in Saudi Arabia. The prayers?
Yeah.
Oh, not long. 5 minutes. 5-10 minutes. And so those minarets on the outside, those are, yeah, the minarets on the outside, those are what is the call to prayer. And someone would go up there 5 times a day and do the call to prayer. You see here the scale of what the Hagia Sophia was. So these are some original mosaics. Some of them have just been deteriorated, but you can see the decoration is still there. There were mosaics up here. Those were taken down and replaced with Islamic. This is a Islamic calligraphy and script with prayer.
What are those things on the wall? Yeah,
Some sort of prayer is my guess. I don't know. I should know that. I should look that up, but I don't know.
Have you been here?
I haven't. No, I've not been to.
Is it actually? Well, it says down here.
And
They
the
actually.
fountain is insane.
Little rockets up there. It says in 2020, so they actually use it as a mosque now.
Yeah. So
So you can't go.
The
visit.
fountain is so cool.
So you can still visit. So these were the 4 minarets that were added. There would have been a cross up on top and said now there's a crescent moon. All right, so in 1935, Turkey became more secular. It became less of a Islamic state. It became more of a secular state. And so the Turkish president, as a gesture of goodwill, because he knew there was a lot of hurt feelings between the Catholics and the Muslims about this building, he said, well, I'm going to decommission it as a mosque. I'm going to turn it into a museum. Anyone can visit, which was, at least better. But just a couple years ago, 2020, the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, converted it back into a mosque. Now, you can still visit, but you just can't visit while they're having prayers. Okay?
What's that little island in the river?
Don't know.
Right, so it's not like wrong if Catholics were to go visit it.
You're allowed to,
It's
yeah.
there.
You should not go during prayer service, or if there is prayer service going on, you just can't participate. But if it's generally not a good idea to go to a mosque because you don't want to even give the impression of acceptance. But you're allowed to tour, for architectural interest or something like that.
They made that rule not to go during prayer service.
I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think that the clerics would allow Christians to come in during, and certainly not women.
What is secular? Are any women?
Secularized meaning there's no religious aspect to it. So America is a secular state. It doesn't have a state religion. It's secular. Secular means no religion. So he secularized this mosque, turned it into a museum.
So you saw that Our Lady and
It's still there? Yep. All the pictures that I've showed you are still there.
Are women ever allowed into a mosque?
Yes, but you have to cover your head.
Like,
So normally you wouldn't find a lady job with Will Smith has?
No, not a full one.
Like a veil?
Yeah, just. I think it would have to be more like a scarf, not just like a chapel veil. Okay, so this has not a lot to do with art, but I thought this was really cool.
So what about the people that don't believe in that? Can they just walk in without one and be fine?
You'll probably be told to wear one.
it looks like Aladdin.
It kind of does. This was a story I heard on NPR a couple years ago, and I just thought it was pretty cool. I do. Play. Because you kind of wonder, what would it be like to go to Mass there? What would it have been like before the 1400s when it was turned into a mosque, right? I always kind of wonder that, like kind of like what you were asking about with the candles. What would it have been like? So this kind of gives you an idea through some technology what it was like.
When the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul was built in the 6th century, it was the largest building in the world, an engineering marvel. And the unique acoustics inside inspired composers to write 10 centuries worth of religious music, specifically to be sung there. Then the Ottoman Empire invaded in 1453, and the Hagia Sophia became a mosque. Choral music was banned, even the music of B.J. Liederman, who writes our theme music. And the sound of the Hagia Sophia was forgotten until now. Sam Harnett of the World According to Sound podcast has the story.
So this is Christian. This is Byzantine chant.
This 13th century Byzantine chant is being sung by Capella Romana, a choir from Portland,
It's cool. It's very cool.
This is what they sound like in a studio.
So this is them in a studio.
How do they know they say this?
You saw the notations.
Imagine, it's the early 13th century. You're sitting inside the Hagia Sophia. Marble pillars rise up around you. Dusty light filters into the windows in the massive dome above. And this is how you might hear Capella Romana.
That's really cool.
The music was written for this, not to be sung in a studio.
It's so sad that like someone never.
But I kind of wonder, well, then how did they figure this out?
Information is possible because of two scholars at Stanford
A balloon.
University in two very different fields. Mr. Ajeva
Seriously.
That video.
A lot of my work is focused on reality in art and architecture.
Jonathan Abel is in computer music development.
I studied the analysis, synthesis, and processing of sound.
When they met, James started telling Abel about the Hagia Sophia, how he couldn't really understand the experience of worshippers there, unless the computer music was amazing. As she talked, Abel started to feel a prickling of excitement. They could recreate what that music would sound like, if only they could get in the Hagia Sophia and pop a balloon. When a balloon pops, it makes an impulse, a sharp, quick sound that takes on the character of whatever space it's in. So when a balloon pops, you're really hearing the acoustics of the space itself, says Abel.
The space interacts with the sound.
So there's always an echo in every room. It has a unique echo.
The geometry, the size, the materials present, that sort of thing.
Tacheva volunteered for the balloon popping mission at the Hagia Sophia, which is now a museum. She flew to Istanbul
Not
and
anymore.
convinced the museum to let her in after hours.
So I had all the equipment and I spent 5 days in the space.
The guard pops the balloon while Biscuit is wearing little clip-on microphones right near her ears. So the balloon pops, the sound echoes and reverberates through the space, and is captured at Bisla's head.
Remember that balloon pop? Here is what Pancheva recorded inside the Hagia Sophia.
Just one balloon.
Able to use the acoustic information in the
So
balloon pops
with computers and
to
science,
filter that
they're
can make
taking
anything
that
sound like it's
sound.
inside the Hagia Sophia.
Now they can
This
come up with a
process is called
filter
convolution,
and a
it is
process
mechanism
and apply that.
by which the acoustics of Hagia Sophia
Isn't that
can
cool?
be imprinted on any sound
McLaren never
processor.
went in
And
insane.
it's only really been possible
Not allowed
for the last
to.
10 years or so because of
Why not?
advancements in our understanding
They
of
don't
how
have their own
sound
songs.
works in a space.
You can't do choral songs in there.
Imagine if in the early 13th century.
You can't do choral songs in an
you're sitting
Islamic
inside
place.
the Hagia Sophia, marble
Not like this.
pillars rise up around you. And dusty light filters in through the windows in a
That's what they
massive
Christians
dome
said.
above.
So they actually weren't singing in there.
They take the filter.
Is beyond
1 second.
humanity.
All because of a
The
balloon.
sound is trying to
Inside.
communicate.
So this would have been the Christian singing.
This is Byzantine.
That's so cool.
They have the music, they just didn't know what it sounded like. That's ridiculous.
Capella Romana recently released an entire album with this filter called The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia.
The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia. It's online. You can listen to it. It's pretty cool. So they pop the balloon, and then through the magic of computers and artificial intelligence and all that stuff, they're able to say, all right, we know this balloon was here. All these different microphones are over in these different places. All right, now we can come up with a filter. Now let's take that filter and apply it. And they could apply the filter to my voice. And I think actually just like a year ago, this story was like 2 or 3 years ago, before it was turned back into a mosque, so they were able to do it. I think they made the filter available. So like if you have the right software, you can take that filter and apply it to anything. So you could hear what it would sound like. And they have this for different buildings too. Inside Notre Dame, inside all these various places. By doing the same thing, you can mimic what a song or a voice or anything is going to sound like in a specific spot. It's pretty cool. Yeah,
It's called The Lost Voices of what?
of Hagia Sophia. All right, so we don't have a ton of time left. I think we have about 10 minutes. Let's look briefly at St. Catherine's Monastery. We look briefly at this one, yeah. So this is one of the other 2 buildings that Constantine started. Remember, Constantine started the Hagia Sophia, never finished it. It was finished by other emperors. But Constantine did start and did oversee the completion of this. It's not as impressive a building. It's more impressive just because of its history and what it holds and its history to Christendom. So St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai. And we know Sinai from the story of the burning bush. And that's why the monastery is there. This is the oldest surviving monastery in Christendom. It's not the oldest continuously used monastery in Christendom because there was a time when it wasn't being used as a monastery. But it is the oldest one. If you look at when does it start and are people still there? Yeah, it is. So there's a travel journal written in Latin by a pilgrim woman named Hagia who describes this place, not as it stands today, but a smaller one, around 381 to 386. So there were people living here in the desert as hermits, as monks, or as sisters during this time, at least from 381, probably earlier.
So that's Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Moses climbed.
Mm-hmm.
Burning bush there.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, it wasn't Constantine. It was Justinian. Justinian the First. We're going to talk about Justinian much more here in a little bit, next class. But Justinian the First ordered a completion of this monastery, enclosing the chapel of the burning bush, also known as St. Helen's Chapel. Supposedly St. Helen, she did a lot. So she's the mother of Constantine, right? She ordered a chapel to be built on the place of the burning bush. And according to legend, the bush that grows in the courtyard, I couldn't find a picture of it. Sorry, I tried. The bush that grows in the courtyard is still the same one.
It's still burning.
No, it's still there. It's still alive. I don't know. Maybe, right. With a lot of these things with Catholic tradition, I'm not trying to make you less pious, but there are certain things where it's like, well, this was the original slipper of Our Lady, right? There were all these relics that came about, especially in the Middle Ages. Well, as historians and as art historians, and I don't know if we've talked about provenance yet. I think seniors, we definitely have provenance, right? The history or the story of an object. Can we trace an object's roots back to where the artist first did it? In the case of an archaeological object, right, the King Tut's mask, yeah, it was in the same spot. We have provenance, right? It was there. We have this history. Provenance is a French word basically meaning tracing the history of an object. With a lot of these medieval artifacts and relics, there's no provenance. So is it wrong, you know, so like in Chartres, in the Cathedral of Chartres, seniors, we talked about Chartres last year. Or, did we? Yeah. It was the year before. We'll talk about Chartres a little bit later on. One of the reasons why Chartres is so important, this cathedral in France, is because it has the veil of Our Lady. Is it actually? You know, maybe, maybe not. We don't have provenance for it. Is it wrong to go and say a prayer before the veil of Our Lady? No, because what are you doing? You're not praying to the veil. You're honoring Our Lady, right? So I'm not trying to diminish your piety, but, you know, if someone goes, well, this is where this happened. Okay, great. Does it help your faith? That's all these objects are meant to do, right? Does it help your faith? And if it does, then great. Then do it, right? It doesn't really matter. But there's a lot of these things where it's like, tradition dictates that this was the original burning bush. Well, I always substitute tradition in these cases with, it is piously believed, right? Because people piously do believe this. And that's okay, and that's good. But I'm a bit of a skeptic, so whatever. Anyway, St. Catherine's Monastery. So it was built around this area. It was supposedly built by the Empress Helen. Constantine the Great supported this, and then the entire monastery was built by Justinian I in the 500s. So right around the same time that Hagia Sophia is being built, this is also being built. But it predates it, right? There's a tiny part of it. And it is still active as a monastery today. You can go and visit it, you can go and see it, but obviously it's in a very austere place, right? Sinai is not an easy place to live.
Like nothing around it.
Yeah, you're looking at it.
For air conditioning.
Look at it.
Nope, thick walls. Thick
Yeah, I was
walls.
gonna say, that's
So
pretty really
there is a stream, so there is a small stream, there is a little bit of, and they've dug some wells. But this is a lot like what the Holy Land looks like. This is the Holy Land, right? It's very arid, there's a lot of desert. And so to make anything work, you have to dig a lot of wells and do a lot of irrigation.
So even now, there's no electricity, right?
Oh, there's probably electricity, but not, I would probably guarantee you there's no air conditioning. Yeah, probably not Wi-Fi. Here's the rough plan of the monastery. This was on a road, this was on a pathway that was connecting various cities. And so in order to maintain the security of the people living there, of the religious living there, and also to keep people out and away, right, and to maintain the integrity of the monastery for prayer, they built these large walls. And before the 1800s, this doorway didn't exist. This was added on. The only way to get in and out was to be hoisted up and down. It was the only way to get in and out of the monastery was to be hoisted in by someone from the inside, right? They were cloistered. They want to keep the outside world out. And so because of they didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have a lot of riches, it's not really that beautiful of a place, and so it was never really sacked, it was never really taken over. There were a lot of pilgrims who started visiting there. Again, the Crusaders traveling through, they started to go back to Europe and talk about, hey, there's this place, and so it became a place of pilgrimage. Various churches have had monks there. The churches of Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Crete, Cyprus, Constantinople, all these various patriarchates have all had monks there or sisters there over the years.
So what kind of Catholic church is this? Is it like?
It's Orthodox today. It's Orthodox. So it is schismatic today. It still holds ancient icons. We talked about this one. This is still there today. And then two of the oldest encaustic icons that we have. These were painted around the 6th century. So right around the time when the monastery was built, these two were built or made, and then we saw this one already. Virgin and Child enthroned with the saints. So these are still there. So it was a workshop, just like any other monastery that we see throughout Christendom. It was a workshop, it was a place of prayer, it was a place of work. But we can't really say it was a Benedictine monastery. It was a Franciscan monastery. It's changed throughout the years, depending on which bishop is in charge of it, then he'll put his people there, and then he'll move, something like that. So it's changed quite a bit over time. But one of the things that is important, it is also, in its small space, it has a great amount of books. The library is the oldest continuously operating library in the world in this small monastery. This was during the time when there were lots of invasions. Lots of other libraries were burned and sacked and destroyed. And so a lot of the old manuscripts that we have that tell us about the very early times of the church are still there. And so scholars flock to this place to read through these manuscripts and to, check them out. It's the largest collection of early codices and manuscripts in the world, outnumbered only by the Vatican Library. So in this small space, they have the largest library of religious books in the world, except for the Vatican. And these books, these scrolls, these very delicate scrolls, some of them are on parchment, some of them are on papyrus, some of them are on animal skin. These are able to be preserved because of the dry, arid climate and the fact that it's been a stable monastery for all this time.
That's somebody's actual handwriting that typed up.
No, that's writing.
That's
so even?
That's so straight too.
Yep. So this is called the Codex Sinaiticus. This is the oldest. This is one of the oldest Bibles that we have today. Interestingly, this is a form of Greek. Interestingly, it has 2 books of the Gospels that are not in the current Bible, because again, when the church put together the Bible and said, all right, all these books are okay, they weren't sure about the authenticity of 2 of the books, or actually more than 2, a few of them. And so they said, well, we're going to leave them out because we're just not 100% certain that these were actually written by the people that it is said that they're written by. But this Bible still has it. This codex still has those two books. I forget which ones they are, but
Are there any
anyway.
churches or types of Christianity that would follow those?
No, because the entire church had kind of decided on those by about the late 500s, early 600s, and that was before the split. So this is just, they're more for scholarly work. Yeah.
Mormons don't read those other missing books, do they?
Right. No.
Because I know that they have other books that are missing from the Bible or something.
Right. There's a lot of documentations in there. This is an interesting document, and again, the history of Muslims and Christians and how they work together and live together is really complex and really fascinating. We don't have the time to go into it at all. But this is a document from Ashantaim of Muhammad granting protection and other privileges to the followers of Jesus. So for a time, this whole area was managed by Muslims, and he goes, well, the people who are living in this monastery, they're allowed to travel. And if you carry this will give you protection as you go, because he respected the people who were living in the monastery. He said, you may go and you may travel to other churches in the area, and my people will not bother you if you carry this. And it's literally signed with his handprint. And so they still have that. They still have that today. No, that's Duros Europa. Dura Europus. Durus Europa. All right, 2 more buildings next time, and then we'll be done with Byzantine.